Anybody like pulling you to the side and asking you to squeal like a pig or anything?
No, no, we avoided all of that.
That's good.
48-hour art check, round 47. Okay, we are back.
All right.
So
sweet.
Yeah.
Good old Deliverance joke there.
Yeah, I've never actually seen that movie, but every time I go whitewater rafting, somebody's always like, you know, if you hear banjos, paddle faster. So
that's a good point. Yeah, don't listen to somebody's their hard sell on the music being the universal language whilst banjoing by the river.
Sounds good.
All right. So what'd you get done?
Let's see. So I got this done. I've started packing stuff up. You can kind of see, like, I'm trying to gather it, organize it. I've come up with a couple systems of like looping things through grid. So it's all just getting packaged. You'll see in the lower left, I got the stickers there. And so that's pretty much it. I got my stickers in. I've been like, I took down my sign. It's like in a roll. Like, I've packed everything up, and so I'm like, I'm getting ready to go. That's pretty much it. I've also been trying to figure out how to draw kids because the proportions are different, which I'll talk about later. How about you? What did you get done?
That is weird with kids, and they do have absurdly large heads.
Right.
Like little mini bodies. So I got a page done, roughs for my comic.
Yeah.
And just getting a little further. I'm not quite finished, but I'm closer to finished. So I think this is going to be worth it when it's done, but it is taking as much time as I expected. So
yeah, that's awesome. As far as challenges go, doing anything outdoors just seems to take a lot of time. And so yesterday was just shot. I wasn't able to get anything done yesterday. But it was fun. We went whitewater rafting on the Snake River. Big Kahuna and Tabletop, if anybody, or Lunch Table, or I don't know. There's always weird names on those rapids. But it was good. It's been a few years since I've done that. But, you know, just challenging from a time standpoint.
Yeah, I think just living in that area, too, I think that must be something that's more common, you know, because it's like there's not a lot of whitewater rafting locations in my neck of the woods.
Right. With the man-made rivers.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so for me, it's the challenges are just, you know, family stuff, like doing family stuff. And then like tomorrow, retracking with my band, but I also have a family, you know, thing. And so balancing that's tough, but doable.
Yeah, so as far as plans, I will finish packing everything up, and I'm going to do children's studies because I'm trying to come up with, I'm doing a book. My next book is about a little girl, and I want to do things. So I've been looking at, like, how does Scotty Young draw things? How does Bill Watterson draw things? I'm just trying to, like, get a feel for, like, how to cartoonize like a kid without, like, leaving my style and what I'm comfortable with, which is slightly more realistic. So I'll just be doing a lot of, like, kind of character studies before I start developing the character.
Got it. For me, I'm just gonna try to get the tight pencils done. So I think hopefully by the time we have this again, at least have the rough pencils finished, I should say.
Okay.
And then record a song on Monday morning. So that should be good. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And we forgot to talk beforehand on what we want to talk about.
Oh, yeah. So what do we want to talk about?
I don't know. What's been on your mind?
We got our Trello.
Yeah. You wanna pull that up?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could kind of tie in the idea of kind of what's going on with like retracking with my band and like kind of. Yeah, I think that ties in a little bit with what I'm experiencing with this page, where it's taking a long time, and it's. I guess what's on my mind is like quality's worth it sometimes.
Yeah.
And I like, for me, like, even though the band thing is a side project, it's for fun. I don't really see a point in us like tracking a demo unless it's really good.
Right.
And so, you know, taking the time to kind of recut it when it's not coming out perfect. Some of the distortion was off. Some of, like, it was mostly a tone issue and a recording issue, but still, it's like we could phone it in and have like this kind of mediocre album where we could really perfect it and have something we're proud of, whether people dig it or not.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about this page. Like this page, it's so tempting to just gun, or like when I'm laying out a spread like this, to like be like, oh, well, that'll take forever, so I'll just reframe it from a different perspective, so it'll take less time.
Right.
I feel like just putting in the time to draw all these little covers that I'm doing is going to kind of pay off in the long run, because it has so far on this book, where I'll take the time on a page where it's a little ambitious, and then it ends up, at least for me, leaving me with more fulfillment, because I like look at the page and I'm like, oh, that did look good with all that time. And I think it's similar to your kid's book too. You know, looking at that, it's like there's a lot of pages that you could have phoned in some of that stuff, but instead you went through the steps of adding all those extra textures and stuff to like the trees and to the different textures within one image. And that must have been insanely time consuming, but I think the end result's a lot more satisfying. You know, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. And I found it interesting because, you kind of have to balance that. I think there's kind of a moderation deal and a balance situation, because when I did my comic, right, my first comic that I did, I hadn't really learned how to draw, and so I got like 40 pages in, and then, you know, if you do 40 pages of a comic, you're going to get better than you were before, especially if you are starting out and really terrible. So then I went back and started looking at the old stuff, and I started updating those pages. And then I realized that there's kind of a certain trade-off where you have to decide how much you're willing to do to get the quality that you want, but also, you know, like the perfect page doesn't exist, you know?
Yeah.
And so the perfect song doesn't exist. The perfect recording doesn't exist. I mean, there are Beatles songs where they're not harmonizing correctly, and they cut it, and, you know, whatever. And I'm sure that the Beatles didn't do just one take on every song, because I mean, with George Harrison, you know, and those guys, they were real musicians who really cared about stuff. But at a certain point, you have to say, this is how far I'm willing to go, but I still have to balance that out with, I want to finish this project. I've got deadlines. I've got progress. And so it's an interesting thing, because in my book, I did have quite a few pages like what you're talking about, but I also balanced that out with, I need to get this done in 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, because it was 6 months, and I did a ton of pages at the end. A lot of those were spot illustrations, which I think from a pacing standpoint worked really well, because it helped, like, spots help speed up the they're not as dense, right? Yeah. It also was kind of a trade-off for me. Like, I could have done 40 pages of super intense illustration, but I didn't. I did, I don't know, whatever, 25 or 30. And then I had to trade that off to get the book done. And so I think there's kind of this balance, because you could actually go in, if you wanted to do this, you could render each one of those cover images at 11 by 17, you know, and get it all, everything, and you could spend the next, you know, 4 months on this page. And so there's kind of a trade-off between taking a little bit of extra time versus taking so much time that, you know, it's not worth it. I think they call that the law of diminishing returns.
Yeah, and I'd also just, I would put it more in like giving your work the time it needs. Like, meaning, like, we're cutting a rock and roll album, so we're not looking for perfection, and like, I'm going to be doing vocals on it, and I'm not by any means a professional vocalist or whatever. And my buddy Josh, who's also in the band with me, he's doing the other vocals, and he's by no means like a you know, neither of us are like trained vocalists. Yeah. We want rawness. We're tracking them live for that reason, because we want it. We don't want to. I feel like there's something that's lost in music when you record to a click track. it's not always bad. There's a lot of bands I dig that do it, but there is something that's kind of lost in the translation, and it's that vibe between the band where the tempo does vary a little bit, and it's raw, and it's got like kind of rock and roll to it. We don't want to lose that by being overly perfectionistic. But if there's like a recording where it's like, you know, we spent some time on it and we invested some time in it, and it's not up to par with what we want, why would we settle for that?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at, is like more of like having like a little bit of high expectations, in the sense of like, if you are working on a story where you have a spread where it's going to make a lot of sense and it's really going to send it home, to have all those textures like you were talking about with your kids' book. A lot of them are spot illustrations and stuff, but they're the pages where it really counts to have all that detail in there.
Right.
You know, it's like you kind of owe it to the art to give it that detail and that time. Agreed, though. You know, I always bring up the pseudo Tolkiens that I knew. I've known a lot of guys in my life and come across a lot of people who had this epic fantasy novel that they were working on their entire life, and they hadn't written a page for.
Yeah.
So all of them were kind of like big fans of the Tolkien method, and they were all creating their like Silmarillion, where they're creating their own languages and filling up journals and making all these weird things. And it's just it bugs me when that happens, because that's like world building to the point where you're in a weird way, it's like you're really not interested in serving the art. You're interested in kind of role playing in a room without anyone seeing. And so there is a point where you have to kind of cut the crap and like deliver. and so I do agree. It's like you kind of need to weigh it out, and it is a feeling thing. But I do find if I turn something in where I'm like, I phoned that in, I usually, you know it as an artist, you know it, whether you're being honest about it with other people or not. You know when you phone something in.
And there's a difference between shortcutting the art and phoning it in.
Exactly.
And taking time-saving measures to meet a deadline. Those are actually two different things. Like the spot illustrations that I did, I still put in the time that they needed to match the quality of the rest of the book.
And they work for the story. They service the story. Like the story would actually not be serviced by having all spreads that have equal detail.
Right.
Like one of my favorite pages in that book that you completed is mostly silhouette. And that's, you know, it's a little harder to compose, but in final execution, that's a fairly quick thing to do as an artist. But it's perfect for that page. And I suspect that you didn't pick the silhouette because you were like, oh, this would be fast.
No.
I think you picked the silhouette because you thought that that would reflect the mood and the feeling of the story.
Yeah. And
so you learn these tricks.
And I was trying to juxtapose that because there was so much detail and everything else. I was trying to make that a really stark black and white moment. Like this is juxtaposed to the detail. And so it stood out because of the lack of detail.
Yeah. It's like you know, like when you see a film, not everything's like a really sweeping landscape, you know, panoramic view. Sometimes it's just a tight angle on a face.
Unless it's Michael Bay, and then every shot is that.
Yeah, and also every shot has no through line of action, which we should get into line of action because that's a huge thing.
Yeah.
Because people think Michael Bay's like picked on, but that's part of why he's picked on, is like he breaks the rule of the line of action all the time, and so his action sequences are literally impossible to follow because the line of action's changing all the time.
Right. There's a whole different topic. I'm going to write that down. That's going in the board. But I did want to use this analogy that I heard one time about the law of diminishing returns, because I think this is helpful. It's kind of like mowing your lawn, right? You can mow your lawn,
or your moss,
which I don't have.
That was
yet.
A callback.
But for those longtime fans, lawns. I do hate lawns a lot, which is why this particular analogy applies to me. You can mow your lawn and do it like once a month, you know, which is kind of like leaving it a little too long.
Yeah.
And then you kind of miss spots because you're going really fast. Maybe you're running, you know. And technically you've mowed your lawn, but it looks like garbage, right?
And once a month is like you're actually not going to be able to go fast because your lawnmower is just going to die every
Choke
5 seconds.
But then you can also mow your lawn where you go nice straight lines. You overlap the wheels so that you don't have any gaps in between the lines, right? And that's a decent job. And that's like at the level of quality that most people are okay with. Some people that are really in love with their lawn will cross-cut their lawn a second time. So they'll go one direction, and then they'll go perpendicular to that direction. That's where you get like that, the diamond grid or the grid. And that is a really well-cut lawn. Almost no one does that a third time because you don't get any value out of the third pass, right? And so that's the definition of the law of diminishing returns, okay? Is you take, you do a good enough job for the first pass and you could be done and that's fine, right? But some people have a higher level of quality expectation, so they cross-cut it. But even those people who have a higher level of expectation would be wasting their time to do it a third or a fourth or a fifth time because there's not really a significant increase in value after you've done it that second pass. And then what you're saying is those people that do world building, I would take that analogy to the people like washing and shining and working on their lawnmower but never turning it on, right? The lawnmower is in pristine condition and looks amazing.
Or they're plotting out like what their pattern is going to be when they actually hit the lawn. Like they're like, this is going to be the angle I hit, and then after I make my first pass, I'm going to turn at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm going to go from that 45 and make a 90, and that's the perfect angle to just get this. I mean,
and then they talk to their neighbors about it.
Yeah, I'm a lawnmower.
Right,
I'm a professional lawnmower.
I'm a professional lawnmower. Look at my
professionally planned mowing lawns. Which anyhow, so I don't know. That's just been on my mind because that's a hard-learned lesson for me. I gunned my first graphic novel. I didn't mean to gun it. I felt like I was spending the time.
Yeah.
But there were so many times on that where I'd do a page and I'd be like, well, I got to get this done. So I'm just going to look over the fact that, this entire thing's talking heads, or that, I drew that face off or something. There's still some moments where I'm like, I'm not being super picky. Like you guys can look at my comic and see for yourselves. Like there are some panels that are off, but I'm being sure that like when I put it out, I'm like, that's the best page I could do at the time with the time I had. And
all of those things that you just mentioned, the best that you can do at the time with the time that you had. I think that's what defines the balance. What defines it, because if you have one page of a 300-page graphic novel and it's the most incredible page, but it took you a year to do because you redid it, you plotted it out, you redrew it, you shot your own reference 15 times and reshot it and then trashed it and did it over again. That's a useless waste of time, right? That's cutting your lawn, cross-cutting your lawn 5, 6, 7 times. Whereas if you got it to a very high level, that was the best that you could do at the time with the time that you had, so you're meeting your deadlines and you're putting in the work to get it done. I think that's the balance that we're talking about.
Yeah.
On the flip side of that is you either just rush through it and it looks like garbage, or you just talk about doing it forever and never actually put pen to paper. And so in between those two extremes of the quest for ultimate perfection that doesn't exist and never finishing anything, or the quest for speed and only finishing garbage, in the middle is this sweet spot, and that sweet spot moves for every person.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the sweet spot is kind of in between. I also feel like, I don't know. I feel like I kind of see one or the other. I see a lot of people who are working on that page for like a year. Mm-hmm. And then I also see a lot of people who are like, man, like I spent like 2 hours on this page. It's crazy. It's done, but it was like 2 whole hours.
Yeah.
And I would recommend that if you're a cartoonist, and this is just, advice, but if you're a cartoonist and you're unhappy with the level of your work and you're spending 2 hours on a page, I would suspect that it might be because you're spending 2 hours on a page. Like that's not a lot of time to spend with a page. Now that also differs on style.
Right.
So there are some styles where like there's a lot of pre-planning, but like once it gets to execution, it's loose. And that's perfect for the style you're going for.
Yeah.
So it really depends on what the story calls for and being in service to the story and in service to your customer, right? Like whoever is going to read this thing.
Yeah.
But anyhow, it's just a thought that's been running across my mind because I'm the type of person who I want to recut it if I can't. If it's not going to be something I can be proud of.
Yeah.
And that's, that's kind of how I've run it
and that's for a while. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I would also think that you're the type of person that after the X amount of times cutting it, whatever that nth time is, there is a cutoff where you're like, this is the best that we can do, and I'd rather have this album out and finished than never finished and shooting for this ideal, right? So that's kind of that balance. So
agreed.
And when we say the slider moves, there are people who their audience, their style, or the genre that they're working in, or the niche of whatever storytelling they're in, expects a certain amount of quantity over, some sort of level of quality. And there's lots of things like that. There's lots of comics like that. There's lots of children's books like that, and people are fine with it. Right, and everybody's okay with it. And then you can slide that to the right. And there's also creators, where it's like if certain people came out with a sloppy book and they did 6 of those books a year rather than 1 a year, I'd be really disappointed. I don't want more from them. I want what they're delivering at the quality that I've come to expect.
A good contrast would be like you have somebody like Weisner who does a book like Tuesday where the rendering is perfect. It's perfect. I mean, it's like if you guys haven't checked that out, it's a perfect children's book, and it's almost completely silent. And it's just late at night, these frogs start flying throughout a city, and you see all the mishaps and shenanigans that happen. And he's gone on to do other books, and most of them are all silent. But he's known for doing like perfect renderings, like beautiful watercolor with pencil, and they're just perfect renderings. I think he's one of the greatest children's book artists alive. And you contrast that with another person who I think is one of the greatest children's book artists alive and children's book writers, which is Mo Willems, who does the Pigeon books.
Yeah.
And they look like they're drawn with like a really thick like wax pencil. I mean, most of them are done on Photoshop. The characters are super simple. And it's just like 3 colors on each book, 3 or 4 colors, really limited palettes, well written, well planned, but like pretty quick execution.
Yeah.
And if he spent a lot of time on it, I think actually those books wouldn't sell as well.
Right.
Because the whole look is supposed to be kind of naive and like cartoon modern. And so, you couldn't have a Tuesday work in a Mo Willems style.
Right.
Where it's, all about like, look at this beautiful sunset in a Mo Willems style. That's not going to happen.
Right.
But you also couldn't have Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus in a Weisner style. That wouldn't work. I mean, it would be so real, it would be almost disturbing. Actually, that would be really funny to see somebody's take on doing the pigeon books like really photorealistically. That would be
really interesting.
Creepy. So, like it really does depend on the intention and the story and the service to the story.
Yeah.
But neither artist do I look at and feel like they didn't fulfill their part of the bargain.
Right.
And there are some artists that I look at and I'm like, they totally phoned it in and aren't fulfilling their part of the bargain. And so it's that thing, kind of unspeakable, but you can tell.
Right.
So Pikey Camp was asking if I double tracks with autotune. We don't touch autotune, but we do double vocal tracks. So yeah.
I read that comment, but I don't know enough about recording to understand what he's asking or suggesting.
So auto-tune is when you like hear a song and it's like the best example would be like Believe by Cher, where it's like believe, like it does this like weird pitch shift thing.
So it's like the computer,
that's auto-tuning.
The computer fixing the notes, right?
Yeah, but it has a very specific sound, and it's actually kind of a sound that is pretty popular in modern hip hop, where it's like they kind of play with auto tuning, and it's like its own voice sound on its own. But yeah, we don't touch the thing. Um, that's interesting. So Pikey's saying he's glad we got on the topic, and that he's been struggling with self expectation on his graphic novel, and he's drawn the first chapter several times. So. And then Greg was recommending to check out Auto-Tune the News. It's like a YouTube staple. They auto-tune the entire news, where they'll be like,
I think I've seen that, where they turn what they're saying into a song, even though they're just saying it.
That's auto-tune. It's literally they just press a button and say like, I wanted to do these notes and it makes the news do
That's funny.
But yeah, for rock and roll, I don't think auto-tune is a very good mix.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you mentioned that, Pikey. I think that it's important to kind of actually just be bold and not get in that redraw cycle where you're redrawing forever. Because that prevented me from doing comics for a really long time.
I got some terrible advice at the beginning. I was listening to a bunch of people as I was getting started in comics, which was a few years ago. And several people said, you should learn to draw before you start. You should like get really good before you do your first comic, like because you're gonna want to go back and redraw it and fix it and stuff. And had I listened to that, I don't think I would draw today. I think I never would have done it. I think I would have because, and this is another topic that Josh and I want to touch on at some point, is why drawing a comic is the best way to learn how to draw. But but I totally feel that like having to go back and redraw the pages, and I think there's, to a certain extent, I think that's okay. But at some point in time, you just have to say, this is where I am. Now with my comic, I ripped it from the internet. No one knows what it looks like anymore, though they might have seen it in their memory.
Yeah, I might have asked for a copy and read it recently.
Yeah, I did get you a copy with heavily annotated, not annotated, but with a heavy asterisk implied that I recognize that this is really bad. There are pages in that I really like, but I don't feel like I got to the point where I had leveled up so much, and my first comic was this epic thing. I think I got like a fifth of the way through the story, so at 60 pages it would be hundreds of pages and would have taken me years and years and years. And for me, because I wanted it to be a self-contained story, if I had done that and finished it and spent the next 3 to 5 years finishing this thing, I don't think it would be good, because for the first 40 pages I didn't know how to draw. so like at this point, I've actually, and I didn't know how to write either. I didn't know how to storytell. I didn't know how to plot. I mean, I feel bad for Josh reading it now, because there are probably a dozen pages in a row of nothing but exposition, just talking heads explaining this world building that I had come up with. And I still like the world building, but I've gone back and I've rewritten that story, and I will do it again someday, but I'm going to start from page 1. I'm never going to go redo it, because it was so bad on so many different levels.
Yeah.
Compared to what
but
I
it was a good
today.
Bad, right? Just to tie it into the theme, I feel like that's very similar to like my first few forays into comics, and I feel like I can't undo those, and I'm glad I can't, because I think that if I had gotten in a cycle of just retelling, it would have been a slower leveling up. Whereas just trying to finish, you learn a lot. But I do feel like I feel torn between the two, because I know there's that huge trend online of like finished, not perfect. And I would agree with the idea of finished being better than perfect. Like,
being better than
I'd rather have a finished product than nothing.
Yeah. And I have 60 pages. And if I were to go back in time, knowing what I know now, I would do exactly the same thing. Because even though I didn't finish that book, I showed myself that I can
do it.
Thumbnail, pencil, ink, color, and letter 1 page a week for 60 weeks straight. I didn't miss.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a lot better. I learned a ton of stuff. And so I find that experience exceptionally valuable, even though I'm very hard on the results of it now looking
Yeah.
back. But I'm like,
No,
I've
and you
leveled
can't
up.
get comics are one of those things where most people can't get good at comics until you do a really bad comic. It's like you have to try it
Yeah.
and kind of really mess with paneling. Like you can be critical of paneling. You can read McLeod's book on,
Yeah.
comics, and you're like, I understand comics because I read a book called Understanding Comics. But there's a difference between kind of reading a book and applying it. And when it gets to application, it's like the application's where you learn. And so it's very much like writing an essay. You could learn all the formal rules of writing an essay,
Yeah.
but you really kind of have to write an essay to learn how to write an essay. And you have to write a couple bad ones, have them critiqued, and then you're like, oh, okay, now I know the format. Now I know how to do it. Now I know what not to do and what to do. Comics are the same, but you also in the process are forced to do so much drawing that you inevitably will get better. And if you're not getting better when you're making comics, you're probably making them wrong.
Yeah, you're making them wrong, or your story's not good, or you're ignoring the story. Because with me, I probably would have been like, if I was just like, I'm going to learn how to draw, and I just learned how to draw, I would draw the things that come easy to me, and I would draw the things that I enjoyed doing, but I probably would not go and like figure out how to do perspective, or how to do backgrounds, or how to draw a 3/4 profile of a person or whatever. And so the cool thing about it is in doing it, and everything that we've been talking today is like putting story first, right? Which includes finishing the story, but it also includes like a certain level of quality. If that 3/4 profile of somebody, or that 2-point or even 4-point perspective, where you're doing some sort of curvilinear grid or something, if that's the best thing that serves the story, you have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the cool thing about it is, you can learn how to just do some types of illustration, and you're really good at drawing mice, or you're really good at drawing eyes, or whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you have to write a story and then draw that story, you have to draw. And I can't remember who said this, but one of the Batman artists a long time ago said, the cool thing about drawing Batman is I get to draw Batman. The downside of drawing Batman is I have to draw Bruce Wayne in his office, or Gordon, picking up the telephone. But if I only draw Batman really, really well, but when it comes to, the police station, I kind of phone it in, everybody's going to notice. So I also have to figure out how to draw a desk of a police chief with pencils and a typewriter and a phone, and make sure that is also really good. And so the cool thing about doing comics is that if you serve the story, you will learn to draw everything really well.
Yeah, and you'll be forced to, and that's like a non-ending, it's an unending process, because unless you're drawing the same exact story sequence over and over again, inevitably you're going to have to change backgrounds, you're going to have to change perspectives, you're going to have to change the shot. So it's good. Like a personal example of this that was really weird to me at the time, but it makes a lot of sense now to me, was I remember going to Comic-Con a long time ago and getting a sample packet for an ink test from Bongo, because I had a couple friends who did colors for Bongo, and they paid pretty well. They paid their colorists pretty fairly. And so I was like, well, I bet they pay their inkers pretty well too. And so I was like, I'd be interested. So I actually showed them, because they don't give the test to just anybody who asks for it. You have to show them portfolio and stuff. And I showed them my first independently published comic, and they were like, here's the packet. And I was like, oh, okay, really? Cool. I thought you guys said you were picky and stuff. And they were like, yeah, but here's the reason we say that. They were like, most of the time when we get samples, it's just drawings of The Simpsons. And they're like, we don't want to see that you can draw The Simpsons. We want to see that you can draw a desk, that you can draw a room, that you can do a sequential story, that you can do a dialogue sequence where people are focusing on a vowel when they're saying something, so it doesn't look like just the same generic, movement that, even the Muppets have a focus on vowels and stuff, and they don't have a lot of movement in their mouths, but you'll see why Jim Henson's so revered, and why other puppet shows didn't quite do as well as the Muppets because of just the control they had over that little movement.
Yeah.
And we're doing the same thing, you know, in comics. So they noticed that kind of stuff, and they were more interested in seeing that you could pull that off because the other stuff you can learn.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really weird at the time because I ended up looking at their style guide and being like, I don't want to do this for a living, even if you had a gun to my head, because it felt like doing, you know, geometry or algebra for a living. And I'm like, I've never been a big fan of math. And
was it all like super consistent line weight?
Not line weight so much as like just rules for turnarounds, where it was like, you know, when the eye is at this angle, it needs to have 5 pupils width. Like they're actually really notorious for having a very
like super
picky style guide.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it has really strong results. I mean, even watching the new show that Groening's doing on Netflix, it's like, it's so good. Yeah. Just the style is really consistent, but that's something that was developed over years and it's really hard to do. And the cartoonists who can do it, hats off to them because it's amazing.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for me, but it was interesting to me that that's what they looked for over like the guys who'd be like, look how well I can draw Bart. You know, they don't want to see that. They want to see that you can do stuff. And I think that happens a lot with guys who are aspiring to do Marvel. They want to do like a great splash page and show like I can draw Spider-Man in dynamic poses.
Yeah.
And I think more what they're looking for is, yeah, but can you draw Spider-Man when he's Peter Parker and he's talking to Mary Jane
and still make it interesting
and then go to dynamic? Like, yeah. Can you do all of that?
Yeah.
So yeah, anyhow. All right. Well, we're going kind of long, but it was a good topic and we should push this on to the next time. I think we should talk about comics helping people draw.
Yeah, I think that's great. Maybe I'll swallow my pride and show a couple examples of some really bad pages.
I could bust out some bad Jacob's Apartment pages and we could have a field day with here's some of our bad early comics.
Yeah, that would be kind of fun. And talk about why it's really bad and what I've learned since then. I think that's good.
I know for me it was like maybe having backgrounds that aren't black behind these giant talking heads would be helpful.
For me it was
just having less giant talking heads.
For me it was I had fully bought into the lie that you should never, and a real artist never uses reference. And so I was trying to draw like people's faces from like whole cloth. It was terrible. Really awful. So one of the major level ups in my first comic was when I finally gave myself permission to like look at what things looked like. So
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. All right.
To be continued. All right. So the intro music was by No Saboteurs, which is my band. So you should check them out on Facebook. If you are inclined, you should check out my work at quarterlystories.com. And you should definitely check out Cory's stuff. And keep an eye on this dude's site and his YouTube channel. You can check it all out at corykerr.com. But there's going to be stickers and prints and all sorts of cool stuff coming up after the convention. What was your convention booth number again?
TE33. So TL33.
Nice. So if you're in Salt Lake during that Comic-Con, go to TL33. And buy some stickers and prints from Cory Kerr. He's awesome. I want to be there. And I'm waiting for those to go up.
The Thursday show is the Thursday of the show is only $15 to get in. So if you're around on Thursday, then you'll save yourself a ton of money that you can spend at my booth.
Exactly. All right.
Okay. We'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.